So a lot of people got like mad at Schefter for saying something like that. I think you and I talked a couple of weeks ago that if I were the Panthers, I would make a list of all the assets I had, and if I could get a legitimate haul for it, or for any of them, I would do it. Deontay Johnson, if you're not going to trade him, shouldn't they sign him to a contract extension?
Yeah, that would be, I think, something a lot of fans would like to see. And I know we talked about this. The guy on this team who probably has the most value based off of where he's at contractually right now and just talent-wise is J.C. Horn. But to me, that's a non-starter. Like, that's a guy that you want to build around. I understand he has not been healthy for the most part in his career, but he has been so far this season and has also been excellent. You're like, that's not a guy that you want to trade away if you don't have to. Like, you want to have a building block like that, especially at a valuable position at corner. Now, looking at this situation, which I love that Adam Schefter just decided to throw a Molotov cocktail into everyone's house here in the Carolinas yesterday with that, or on Monday with the Pat McAfee show. Like, Deontay Johnson is somebody the Panthers are able to acquire via trade, and they only owe him like $7 million, I believe, this season. And if they trade him, the other team that would only have to pay him $3.5 million. So it's not like the Panthers are going to have to take on some sort of dead cap hit. And there's always a thought that people have that you don't want to watch a guy leave in free agency for nothing, which I don't think is all that big of a deal. That happens all the time, that players, whether they have a lot of value or not a lot of value at all, just walk away. And sometimes you get a comp pick, other times you don't. But with this situation, like, if the Panthers are looking at it where they're 1-3, and we got to wait and see how they play against the Bears and the Falcons, Commanders, Broncos, and Saints the next couple of weeks to figure out where they're sitting at the deadline come November 5th, the same week that they're going to Munich, by the way. Mm-hmm. And if they're like 2-6 or 3 and whatever, maybe they decide to do this and get something for Johnson if Kansas City is desperate enough and the price is right. If the price is not right, then don't just trade him just to trade him. And you look at the situation too, like, you have Andy Dalton, who's playing quarterback. It's not like it's Bryce Young. So the development of Bryce Young is no longer taking center stage here in Carolina. If Bryce is the quarterback, then obviously it's going to be a non-starter to send away his best receiver and in a vet also and Adam Thielen. But if it's Andy Dalton and you have young guys like Xavier Legette, who looked good on Sunday despite the drops, and then Jonathan Mingo, who's also stepping into a larger role, wouldn't you want to focus on potentially their development as they're going to be long-term hopeful solutions here in Carolina, where Thielen's not and Johnson could be? But he also has a decision to make. Does he want to sign here in Carolina after the season, or does he want to go away? And I don't think the Panthers are going to want to give him the projected $25.7 million franchise tag, as he's not worth that kind of money.
Right. And that's why, if I were the Panthers, it's two decisions. I try to re-sign him, right?
Yeah.
I would make the effort, and that you use the next 4 weeks to evaluate where you are and say, all right, we're going to try to re-sign him. If they don't believe that they can, then if you can get, let's just say, a second-day pick, if you can get a third-round pick in exchange for Deontay Johnson, I think at that point you do it. I just think that they would need to evaluate what it would bring them, and if that would bring me a second-day pick, I would do it in a minute.
Yeah, it depends on, like, what's the record of the team, right? What's your prospects of potentially being a playoff team, and long term too. Like, do you think this is somebody that you're going to be able to build with? Do you think, like you said, he's going to be somebody you re-sign, or are you starting over next year with not Deontay Johnson, with Xavier Legette and Jonathan Mingo, and then going and drafting another receiver or signing someone else in free agency to a long-term deal that might make more sense for the team than bringing on Deontay Johnson? Like, there's so many factors that go into this, and it's like a month away. Like, this is not a decision they have to make this week or next week. It's a decision that they have to make probably at the end of the month, right ahead of that week where they will be traveling to Munich. Like, that would be funny where, okay, trade deadline, we've flown over. By the way, Adam or Deontay, or maybe even Miles Sanders, we got to send you back to the States because you got traded and you're not actually playing for us anymore.
Well, who are they playing in Munich?
The Giants.
Maybe they trade him with the Giants. All right, let me ask you this question. Let's just assume that the Panthers are a good team. Not now, but next year, the year after. Is Deontay Johnson a number 1 wide receiver, or is he a number 2 wide receiver? And what do you think the ceiling is for Legette or Mingo?
I'm guessing on a good NFL team, Deontay Johnson would be a number 2 wide receiver. Like even last year in Pittsburgh, like George Pickens was like their number 1 guy. And I understand the quarterback situation wasn't great, did not allow Deontay Johnson necessarily to show off his skill set he's shown the last 2 weeks. But he's a number 2, I believe, on a good team. Look at this receiver core right now. Thielen and Johnson, yes, they've been Pro Bowlers. Yes, they've had their moments and been good players. That by no means in 2024 is a receiver core that scares anyone in the NFL. Now, if Leggett can continue to progress and show the explosiveness that we saw last year at South Carolina and even 2 weeks ago against the Raiders on that 35-yard catch and run, then possibly you got something there where he could be a true number 1. People keep trying to compare him to DK Metcalf. Maybe he does become a DK Metcalf type of guy. And then you have Deontay Johnson as your Tyler Lockett. Like, that would sound great.
Yes,
in theory, but we have to let things play out, but also be realistic about, does Deontay Johnson, who will be now signing his 3rd contract, he's going to want to get paid the right kind of money. And I don't know if he wants to sit here and just take the Panthers deal right away. He might want to wait until free agency. And again, I don't think the Panthers are going to slap the franchise tag on him. Yeah. He probably would want to wait things out even if he gets traded. And there's a possibility Carolina re-signs him after then, but unlikely that would be the case if you trade somebody in the middle of the season. He's going to want to weigh his options before he really wants to stay here in Carolina. So I have a hard time believing, unless the Panthers just blow him out of the water and give him some insane deal, that he's going to say yes to that right now here in the middle of October, the beginning of October.
Yeah, which to me means I would trade him, but then again, I've actively said I would have traded this guy, that guy, that guy. We've talked about it ad nauseum. Let me throw in another player at you, arguably their best, not even arguably. He has been their best player, maybe completely, through 4 weeks of the season, Chuba Hubbard. So 4 weeks from now, would you move Chuba? Or are you going to re-sign him in the offseason?
Well, no, don't do that. The latter part, absolutely not. I'm just not someone who's interested in re-signing running backs when we see time and time again. You can get guys late in the draft and they can come in and you can use them, abuse them, and then lose them after 4 years. Like, that's what the Panthers should be focused on, and what every NFL team, quite honestly, should do, unless you have like a one-of-one in Christian McCaffrey. And that's what the Panthers used to have. That's what the 49ers have right now. Is, of course, he's on the shelf. But it really depends on where Jonathan Brooks is. Their 2nd-round pick out of Texas, who tore his ACL last November. He still is not available as he's on the non-football injury list. And Dave Canales said on Monday that they're not going to be opening up the 21-day window on him to ramp up. And if they didn't open up this week, it feels like the next time, if they do next week, you're going to have to give him all 21 days, because he was not here for OTAs, mandatory minicamp, or training camp, preseason. He was not out there on the field, has not taken a hit since last November. You have to give him the entire ramp-up period, which leads right up to either week 9 against the Saints or week 10 in Munich, or maybe more realistically, like week 12 making a debut against the Chiefs. So if he's not ready to go, I don't know how it makes sense for the offense they want to run to trade away Chuba Hubbard, even if he's on an expiring deal and it's not going to cost another team a lot. Like, he still is a big piece of what they want to do. And at some point in time, even if you're potentially out of it with the playoff race, you still got to do right by the rest of the locker room. I don't know how you do right by the rest of the locker room if you're just getting rid of Chuba Hubbard, who may be your best offensive player to this point in time.
Yeah.
Now, Miles Sanders, that might make a little bit of sense, but I know it's a deal where I don't know if teams want to take on the next 2 years, but his role is kind of limited, so it's possible. But yeah, I don't think that's something they would consider. I mean, I guess they should consider, but I don't think that's something they should do.
I would consider all of it, and the truth of the matter is that for the most part, the Panthers are a roster that is going to turn over a lot. And
yeah,
I wouldn't.
Well, they have a ton of free agents after this year anyway, so that just speaks to it.
I'm not even that concerned about necessarily losing the locker room. Sanders could step in. And if you're going to see Jonathan Brooks play at all this year, frankly, they should have made their determination whether or not Brooks is the future anyway. And I guess they did that when they drafted somebody who had an ACL injury. So to me, it all depends on what is available to me by moving Chuba Hubbard. Again, I'll just use the benchmark. If it could be a day 2 pick, then I think it's a no-brainer.
For a running back, though? I mean,
I don't know if you're going to get it, but if I could get a 4th rounder, if you're picking like early day 3, I would consider it as well. And it all depends on what your evaluation is of Jonathan Brooks. I guess there's also no guarantee that he's ever right. I mean, not everybody comes back from an ACL injury in the same way. So, Julian Council, Locked On Panthers podcast here on the Adam Gold Show. They've not only won a game since we last spoke, but I thought their offense looked good against Cincinnati. So it's 2 weeks in a row where they looked like they belonged in the NFL, which was my benchmark for this season. That was my barrier. I just get over that. Just look like you were not going to get relegated to the second tier of American football. So what have you seen other than competence from them?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's everything that everybody wanted to see, right? I asked a bunch of fans on Twitter before the season started, what are your expectations? And all they wanted to see was a competent offense. Of course, they gave me records and all that, but let's just, the bar is low. That's how low it's been set based off of what we saw in the first 2 weeks and what now we've seen the last 2 weeks. But I mean, I've seen a quarterback in Andy Dalton who, I don't know, man, like if he continues to play this well, there's got to be a serious conversation about, is he going to be the bridge to the next guy, provided that Bryce Young is not going to get another opportunity maybe later on this season if they're out of things, or maybe even next year if they are really doing a complete reset with him. You got to look at seeing whether that makes sense to be the bridge to the next quarterback they want to bring in here, because I think Andy's played really well. I've seen an offensive line, looking at Pro Football Focus, they are number 2 in their pass blocking stat, and that has been a massive question the last couple of years. They've been able to run the ball with those lines when they've been healthy, but they have not been able to protect even when they have had healthy offensive lines. That's no longer an issue at all. And I like what I've seen out of Xavier Legette in the last 2 weeks, and he looks like he can be a guy for them. And that's not something you can say about some of the recent receivers that they have drafted here in Carolina, whether it's been Terrace Marshall Jr. or Shai Smith or Jonathan Mingo, who is still getting opportunities and has 3 more until Adam Thielen presumably could be back for the Week 8 game against the Broncos. I've seen an offense that is able to run the ball, that's able to actually be competent within the pass game, and actually is balanced, which we have not had here recently in Carolina. So I'm loving what Dave Canales is able to do with Andy Dalton as his quarterback.
All right, I want to ask you about defense. So very quick response to this. Would you consider extending Dalton?
After 13 games, we can discuss that.
Right. No, I agree. But it's in the back of my mind that Dalton might be a young 36 because he hasn't played a ton of football the last few years. So if you can get another 2 years out of him and structure,
he's 37 in a couple of days. So keep
he's
that
a young
in mind.
37 in a couple of days, which is what I said, I believe. Julian Council, Locked On Panthers podcast. All right, how do they stop anybody now? No Derek Brown. Pass rushes, no Shaq Thompson for the rest of the year. Josie Jewell's hurt. They're going to do the kid Trevin Wallace in the middle right now. How do they stop people?
I don't know. I really don't. I felt like this was going to be a better run defense this year, and that was assuming that Derek Brown was going to play the majority of the season and play like he did last year. That Shaq Thompson, who was excellent stopping the run back in 2022, the last time he was healthy, that he would come back with Josie Jewell in this system, having had one of his best years a couple years ago for Jero Avero, the DC in Denver, and then adding Jadeveon Clowney, who is known to be a really good run stopper, which would be an upgrade from what they had at Brian Burns in that same facet of the game. And so far, Brown is done for the rest of the year, and they were terrible against the run. That one game he played. Thompson's out for the rest of the year. Jewell's going to miss at least this Sunday in Chicago with the groin and hamstring injuries that he's dealing with. And the other defensive tackles have been as concerning as I felt like they were heading into the year. Like, I think A'Shawn Robinson, all things considered, has actually been fine. But everyone else, like Shai missed the last 2 games, but it's not like they're missing anything because he was horrible the first 2 weeks of the season. Jaden Peavy's actually been a decent signing for them as a guy who did not originally make the roster, but they've signed for the practice squad. Thurman didn't play well this last week with Brian Ray as well. Like, I just don't know. Without Shaq Thompson, with no Derek Brown, having these backup defensive linemen that I don't think anyone in the NFL would be wanting to sign if they were free agents, I have a hard time seeing how this team's going to get better at stopping the run. And J.C. Horn said a couple weeks ago in that loss against the Chargers, a team that loves to run it. If you can't stop the run, you can't stop anything in the NFL.
Right.
And they stopped it against the Raiders because the Raiders are the worst run team in the league. But Cincinnati, a team that came in 31st in the league in rushing attempts, but number 2 in rushing offense according to EPA, when they decided to run the ball in the second half, 25 times after only running 6 times in the first half, they ran for 130 yards. Yeah. So it's hard to see how they're going to stop anybody if they're going to continue to give up that kind of yardage on the ground.
I feel like you just described UNC football.
We don't need to talk about that.
Against Duke. Julian Council, my friend, I appreciate your time. At Julian Council on Twitter, Locked On Panthers Podcast. We'll talk to you. It's very nice to see your face. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
Absolutely, Adam. Always lovely to see you as well.